Welcome to the show, everybody. Birds 365. That man right there. You know him, you love him. His name is John McDonald. McMullen, excuse me. My name is Mark Farzetta. That's first Freudian slip of the day. Scoozy. My name is Mark Farzetta, sitting in today with the great John McMullen. John, how you doing, friend?
I'm doing well. I got to get amped up because Farzy's here. So energy personified. Maybe not Brandon Graham energy, but right underneath.
I will admit, his is a little bit more on the happy-go-lucky side. I tend to skew happy-go-lucky in everything but the world of sports, unfortunately, which is why I guess I do this. John, it's great to see you, man. It's great to have this opportunity to hang out with you for a couple of hours here. We're going to get into a whole bunch of things. We're going to get into Howie Roseman yesterday, whether or not yesterday's press conference with Howie and Nick Sirianni was also there. People didn't seem to know that.
Yeah, I tried to ask Nick a question to get him involved. I got a Doug Peterson feel, early in Nick's tenure, by the way, Mark, he made it a point to sort of take over the dais with his personality. Now he's got nothing to do with this, so he just sits in the back like Doug Peterson. So I tried to get him involved.
I like that you spread the ball around. You got to spread the ball around, man.
Happy playing day, by the way, for Sixers fans, for all those people. Yeah.
I wasn't sure if I was able to reference it or not on Birds 365, but
reference whatever you want. Yeah, happy playing day for all those who celebrate. And I do not. It's like a circus to play in. It's like, I digress.
You don't like the idea of playing a whole 82-game season to earn a 7th seed, only to play to earn the 7th seed in the play-in tournament? You don't like that idea?
We've already gone off on a tangent. It's my fault, but I love it. I love going off on tangents. So I'm going to confession, to Father Farzetta. I didn't know how they did the plan. I covered this league for I did 4 NBA finals for a very long time before I got back to the NFL. And I didn't know how it worked. I had no desire to find out how it worked. I wouldn't read about it. I'm like, this is ridiculous. What are they doing? And I didn't know how it worked. Now that the Sixers, I had to find out. Now I know. It's a joke. It's ridiculous.
I guess I won't ask you about the in-season tournament then, because I think I know how you feel about that. All right, we won't go into the weeds too much with that. But John, when you think about the press conference yesterday, one of the things I want to ask you about is if it swayed you in one direction or another, if it encouraged your previous feeling, or if it made you go another direction as to where the Eagles are going in the draft. I want to get into that with you. I obviously want to get into the question that Howie Roseman was asked about the Hassan Reddick question, because he was asked 2 questions about Hassan Reddick. One he answered with win-win. The other he answered with, if I'm reading between the lines, how dare you ask me? How dare you ask me?
Debut Ram. Fair question, by the way. I've seen how he gets her. Howie's usually very... he's got a lot of experience at this type of stuff, so he usually bends off things pretty easily. But I've seen him now as he's getting a little bit older, like myself. He's getting a little bit surly at times. Last year, it was after they drafted Jalen Carter, and it was our buddy Reuben Frank, who I also defended, asking about the concerns, the off-the-field concerns, which were completely freaking legitimate at the time. There's a reason he went number 9 and not number 1, 2, or 3, solely because of those off the field concerns. And Howie and Nick kind of ganged up on Reuben and basically said, how dare you? This is a young man, greatest moment of his life, that kind of crap. Like, we're there to make this best. We're there to ask you questions. The adversarial relationship it's supposed to be. To ask you legitimate questions, not make sure Jalen Carter's having a good day. So I defended Reuben Frank, and I'll defend Dave here. Perfectly legitimate question. But this time I will say, and by the way, Howie and Nick apologized to Reuben because they knew they were fucking wrong. And I can say fucking on YouTube. But with Dave's question, completely legitimate. I will say I get Howie's frustration. I do, because I get frustrated trying to explain. Every move isn't about one thing. There's a whole butterfly effect situation. Like there's about 70 different things that come off, and everybody wants to boil it down to one thing. And that's what Dave did. Perfect, as I said, legitimate question. But I get Howie's frustration as well. He's like, dude, do you have an hour and a half? And maybe I can explain the roster building process. So I get both sides of that one. And there's a million different reasons why they went in a different direction. And if one of them didn't come into place, like say Bryce Hupp signed somewhere else, or the Eagles didn't believe in Nolan Smith, and Hassan Reddick wasn't about to turn 30, and Hassan Reddick didn't want $24 million, and nobody was willing to give up a day 2 pick 3 years down the road, even. A bunch of different things, and about 15 more. We only got 2 hours on this show, but everybody boils it down to, well, this move is a bad move. And that's how you make mistakes, if you boil things down to one little thing and then you go to the next thing. And that's sort of the draft as well. NFL GMs get caught up in, right? If you got 7 picks, Mark, you're going to get judged 7 times. If you got 13 picks, you're going to get judged 13 times. And as a GM, you got to be disciplined and knock out that noise, because the people that do that, to be perfectly honest, have no idea what they're talking about. So I get the frustration, but hey, that's your gig. You got to handle it better, Howie.
No, I agree. And I agree also with what you're saying about the situation there with Dave Uram and the question that he asked. And I've known Dave literally since the day before his first day in the media. So I've known Dave a long time. I can still remember him walking to my office at WIP with a stack of resumes. And I'm like, dude, you only need one. But anyway, Dave asked a totally legitimate question. I also get both sides as you do. A couple of things on it. One, there is the feeling you get as a reporter asking a question that the subject takes issue with. I don't know if you share the same sentiment as I do, but when that happens in situations that I've been in, where I've asked a question, and Andy Reid would do this to me, where it's like he looks at you and you know he doesn't like the question, and then he asks you a question in return, and you're like, we're really doing this? This is what we're doing now? It's a legit question. Just answer the question. So I get the question from Dave. Dave asked, again, what's the return? I said, what's the positive? What's the upside of the? If you're Howie Roseman and you don't like that question, you don't like being asked to really boil it down to why make this trade, which is essentially what the question was. If you're Howie Roseman, you just say, well, we get a pick back in return. You don't be coy. You don't play dumb and be like, well, it's not a conditional. We're getting a pick. No, like, Howie, do I now have to explain to you what a conditional pick is? Because that's the position you just put me in if you're the reporter.
Well, we're getting a pick. We're getting a pick.
We're getting a pick. It's not conditional as to whether or not. No, I understand you didn't cut Hassan Reddick. But does Hassan Reddick not being on this football team next year make you a better football team next year, especially if he's playing under the same contract, which as of right now he is, with the New York Jets? So I get both sides of it. But for me, I understand, and I think the reason how he got surly is because he was asked a question that made him defend the trade. Because you're not better. You're not a better football team now without Hassan Reddick than you were with Hassan Reddick going into this season. I think that's why he took issue with it.
I'm gonna go even. He took issue with it because he doesn't know Dave that well.
Okay, I thought that might have something to do with that.
How he plays favorites. I'm going to be honest. And if it were asked by a different person, it would have been a different answer. And he's a dick sometimes. Just I'm in that. I'm not in the camp of the chosen few. And he can be a dick sometimes to certain people. And he was a dick sometimes because Dave's not in the chosen few. Now, I'll say that to Howie, and I'll say that to his face. I don't give a shit. He's a dick. And if somebody else answered the question, he would have answered it differently. And he felt like being a dick.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, it certainly looked like he took exception to it. Now, moving on from that subject, I have to ask you about this, because I wasn't swayed one way or another. If anything, it made me feel a little bit more like the Eagles are leaning towards an offensive lineman in the first round of the draft. What they'll use that 22nd. Okay. All right. So I'm going to say this, whether they trade up or not, I don't know. But when you talk about the 22nd overall pick, what they're going to do with their first round selection, whether they move up to 19, move back to 25, whatever. What they're going to do with that pick is go after an offensive lineman. Are you swayed one way or another after yesterday, after 34 minutes of a press conference, John McMullen, are you swayed one way or another as to what the Eagles are going to do in the first round?
No. Howie's very good. As I just call him a dick, I'll also, be fair and say he's a great GM. He's not going to give you a lot. So I build on the foundation of what he's done in the past. And look, we all know his foundational principles. He's very honest about that. And offensive line is one of them. And then you look at this particular draft and you see where's it deepest, and it lines up offensive line. And you start talking about whether you think there should be 7 or 8. Most of them offensive tackles go in the first round versus any other position. It's far, far deeper there than anywhere else. So in theory, especially when you have so many quarterbacks going, and there might be 5, potentially even 6 because of all the quarterback desperate teams. I don't think, but I think 5 are going to go before the Eagles select, and all 5 of them don't belong in that category. That means good players are getting pushed down the board a little bit, and that means there's more of an opportunity for one of these offensive linemen to fall. So if you're playing the odds, I've went offensive line from the start. Now, while I say that, Mark, they're probably not going to like all 7 or 8 of those guys. There's always, it's not just, all right, there's 8 good offensive linemen. We'll take the 8th best offensive lineman. You may not like him. Howie answered a question about the depth of the draft, and he answered that very eloquently. Again, look at the questioner. And one of the things he said was basically, well, tell me who we get. If there's a player we like at that particular position, it's a deep draft to us. I don't give a crap about everybody else, which is the way to do it. So he's not going to like all 8 of them. And his recent history says, whether it's Devontae Smith, Jordan Davis, Jalen Carter, targeted trade up. So he's going to have a cloud, a group, whatever you want to call it, of 4 or 5 prospects that he hopes falls to 22. And if it gets down to that last one, he's probably going to try to trade up and try to target that particular player. But if you're playing the odds, if you're a betting man, yeah, I would always go offensive, defensive line, defensive front, I'll call it now, because it includes edge rushers. But that's always first on the list. Always, always, always.
One of the things I was talking about on my show earlier today was a lot of times you can look at press conferences, especially ones that are 34 minutes long, and you'd be like, well, what do they even say in this? And they're not going to answer questions yes or no, or tell you, of course, that they're going to, we're absolutely targeting offensive line. That's that, and that's where we're going to be, or we definitely want to go corner in the first round. That's not going to come out. But sometimes in the way they explain an answer kind of let you know how they're thinking. And it is a window into their mindset. And although we know, as you so eloquently pointed out, that offensive line in the trenches is the way they like to go, when they were asked about a replacement, I think it was Jimmy Kempski that asked the question about moving on from Lane Johnson eventually and maybe taking a pick and weighing the pros and cons of taking a guy that you kind of stash down on the depth chart for a while to groom them and have them come along, similar to the way he did with Cam Jurgens. How do you weigh the pros and cons of that? And Jimmy actually never mentioned Cam Jurgens, but Howie took it in that direction. And I thought it was actually a really good point that he made, because when you draft in the first round, you want to have a guy that's going to be a starter on your team. You want to have that guy be a home run hitter for you, whether that be offense or defense. But what they did with Cam Jurgens was an interesting thing, because it allowed them to show Cam Jurgens what it takes to be successful in the NFL, what it takes to be successful with Jeff Stoutland and this offensive line. Because he said, instead of saying, telling a first round pick, you should have been here when Jason Kelsey was here. You should have seen the way he went about his business. Or on the defensive line, you should have been here when Fletcher Cox was here and see how he went about his business. No, those guys were here. Jordan Davis, Jalen Carter, they're here. Cam Jurgens, they were here to watch those pros and Definitely one, a Hall of Famer. Another one, maybe a Hall of Famer in Fletcher Cox. Probably a Hall of Famer in Fletcher Cox. You saw them firsthand. You're not just hearing stories about it. You not only saw it, but you got to learn from them directly and pick their brain a little bit. So that got me thinking even more so along the lines of them drafting someone that could be Lane Johnson's replacement down the line if Lane does decide to hang it up within the next year, 2 or 3, where they can have somebody sitting there on the bench where they need the depth anyway. Because right now you're looking at what? Matt Hennessy as a guy to be there as a swing guy from the center to guard position. Yeah. But when you talk about the tackle position, who's the guy you have confidence in stepping up, taking over if it has to be for an extended period of time? You don't have that guy right now. So to have that guy on the depth chart and also look at them as someone that could go down the line and be that replacement to Lane Johnson and learn from Lane Johnson, you want to get that process started as soon as possible, especially when it's already your general philosophy.
Yeah, well, you're not the only one who took it that way. In fact, when I was walking back after the press conference, somebody said basically, all right, Tyler Guyton's the guy. So he focused in on that part of the conversation as well. So I get why certain people are going to say that and see that and uncover that. But I still go back more towards it's a match this year because of the depth at the particular position. Not that they're looking for Lane Johnson's eventual replacement, I guess I'll say it. So, in other words, if there weren't if this weren't a deep offensive line draft, then there were a typical year and all the tackles usually are off the board. All the worthy ones are off the board pretty early in the process. And, you know, maybe you're down to that second level, second round, third round group. And if anything, you'd prefer to trade down. But the Eagles, look, and Howie said this as well, and it's true. And that's what he does in free agency. He tries to draft proof the roster. And I say it all the time on this show, Mark, and I've said it, I think, every day this week, and people are sick of hearing it. And I'm going to say it again. Need is the worst talent evaluator in sports. So if you're drafting for need, if you're drafting saying, well, we got to get this started, we got to get a replacement for Lane Johnson, you're probably going to make a mistake. I think it's more about the depth at that particular position in this draft and the Eagles' foundational philosophy, and that happens to align this year. Doesn't always align, and he's still draft-proof. And you mentioned, well, who's there? Well, Tyler Steen is there, and, you know, people now think of him as a guard. Well, he played tackle strictly in college. He played right tackle more than he played left tackle. He was a right tackle at Vanderbilt, moved to left tackle at Alabama. So you have him, you have Fred Johnson, who they signed to a multi-year deal. So these are not, don't get me wrong, if Lane Johnson gets hurt, you're screwed. But guess what? You're screwed with Jack Driscoll. You can't replace people like Lane Johnson. He's a Hall of Fame player. We talked about it with Jason Kelsey, Fletcher Cox, still playing at an all-pro level. You know you're going to take a hit. But you've draft-proofed the roster enough to say where I don't have to go get Lane Johnson's replacement right now. If the board falls the way I don't like, I can go in a different direction. And that's what Howie's very good at.
Gotcha. All right, coming up, we're going to pick the brain of Ed Kratz coming up in just a second. We'll break down this Eagles press conference from yesterday. Also talk about that depth chart and whether or not Ed is also leaning in the direction of offensive lineman if he had to make his prediction, asking for a prediction, not his desire as to what the Eagles could be doing in the upcoming draft. We'll be back in a second here on Birds 365.